Mr. Berger. Chapter 3. 1979. Fort Knox. Davies was trying to keep calm. He'd been summoned twice in his entire military career. Once when he was promoted to private first class, and today. He was a bit nervous. He was worried he was about to be called out for something he'd done, or even worse, something he hadn't. The figure opposite him was reading his file. He was unassuming enough, but with enough power to call in a random soldier for a background check, Davies was on his toes, even sitting down. "You can call me Beckett, Mr. Davies. Please, tell me about your service." Beckett, a salt-and-pepper-haired man in a three-piece suit, had looked up from the file, staring at him, without Davies realizing. The man's black-rimmed glasses hid this well, and it was a bit startling. "Well, sir," he began abruptly, "I don't quite know what you'd be looking for, but I was promoted to private first class after being stationed in Korea. Apparently my predecessor was shot after cutting down a tree." Beckett raised an eyebrow. 76, right? I remember hearing about that. Shame they had to send you back so quickly. We could have used your... Beckett was scanning the page, and Davies knew what he was looking for, so he interrupted. "Sir, you should know that my unit was recalled about 2 months later and stationed here, as backup for the bullion. I'm not exactly the most experienced soldier, and I am aware of that fact, sir." The bullion, Fort Knox, whatever you'd like to call it, was Davies' post for a while. He was dismissed from service after failing to mobilize for an on-site drill 3 months ago. Convenient enough, he was hitting the end of his 4-year assignment. No, Mr. Davies, that's not what I'm looking for at all." Putting the file down, he folded his hands and continued, steadily. "What I'm looking for is precisely what you are, and I pray you do not take offense to this. I need someone... forgettable." Davies gulped inaudibly. The hell was that supposed to mean? Beckett was already explaining. "The project you're about to be assigned is higher than a matter of national security. Are you familiar with the term little gray man?" Davies shook his head. Beckett continued. "It's meant to convey someone who passes by, unnoticed, blends into the crowd." Beckett leaned back and ran his hands through his graying hair. "You are one, and you don't even need the training. You've been out of service for a year, one big promotion to your name, no next of kin, living a quiet life out in the Midwest. No one would question your existence." He slid another file over to Davies. Leaving his index finger on it, he added, "You're familiar with Roswell." Beckett gazed at him intently. Davies grinned awkwardly, remarking, "Familiar enough. Weather balloon, right?" Beckett gave a quick chuckle and relinquished his fingers from the file. It was headed with the name Operation Manna. He opened it and gave a small gasp, his eyes growing wide as he examined the pages. "Good stuff, Mr. Davies. The last 2 recruits vomited within the first 15 seconds of examining the page. And yes, they're real." Beckett stood up and began to pace while he let Davies peruse the file. "What you need to understand is that this project is already in practice, testing phases. Once the dangers to the public's consumption are eliminated, we will begin mass production. Do you have any qualms with the assignment?" Davies took a long, hard look at the image again. This creature was absolutely grotesque, but he swallowed his disgust. After seeing the primer, he knew that this was what America... No. This was what we all needed. "When do I start?" Jim replied. Present day, JCTC Biology Department. "It's a nice drawing, Ian," Professor Welder continued. "But something like this doesn't exist." "But what if it did?" Ian nearly spat back out, almost slamming his hands on the table. "I'm not saying it's real, I'm saying, what could it be?" He hid his desperate energy a moment and said, "It's for a tabletop campaign." Welder perked up a bit at this. Ian's professor always had a D20 on her desk and rolled it whenever something needed deciding for the class. Environmental variables, mutations, even field research when appropriate. It was fun, Ian had to admit, but now he was using that more for manipulation. He needed answers. "If that's the case," she pored over the drawing again, "it's a cricket, of some variety." Ian was immediately puzzled. She noticed this and continued. Look here, at the legs. She stood, letting her shoulder-length poodle blonde hair drape over the desk. She pointed. 6. Segmented. Closest thing in Kentucky's environment would be a camel cricket. Spotted, if the shading here is accurate. She deftly traced the lines of the legs with her long, weathered fingers and stopped near the abdomen. This is what's bugging me, she winked. Her youthful expression didn't reflect how wizened her face was. This segment on the back, this is more like a spider. Ian was baffled. He'd not expected her to take him seriously, so it was telling him more than he had asked for. So what you're telling me is that this is a spricket? That, she chided as she circled to sit down next to Ian, is the lamest name I have ever heard, but perfect for a D&D campaign. She put a hand on Ian's shoulder and added, Are you all right? You've been working so hard I haven't seen you in classes this week. Ian's mind was swirling, but he remained focused on the conversation. It's combo week at work, so there's been a lot of orders. You can't pass up free fries. Oh, don't I know it, Welder noted, taking a moment to check her phone. Oh, crap. Speak of the devil. My order's here. I'll walk with you. The professor got up, but someone had already made their way to the back of the lab. Ian quietly gathered his things and turned to say goodbye to Welder. Oh, it's Drew, my favorite. Drew? Drew? Ian thought, his head still spinning. The guy in question was handing a bag over, smiling warmly. He was about Ian's build, same uniform Ian wore, and had a look in his eyes. Ian swore it was familiar. As Drew turned to leave, Ian quickly bustled past his professor, apologizing and giving a quick goodbye. He got back out to the hallway and saw the green shirt and beckoned. Drew? Drew turned around. He saw Ian, and what normal expression he had turned to a concerned, almost worried look. He came forward. Ian started. Look, man, I don't care what happened to you at the job, assuming you're the same Drew. He stopped and nodded slowly, curious as to what Ian was going to say. It's whatever, Ian implied, and added, I need to know if you ever delivered to a guy named Carl Ruckman. Drew smiled and waited for the last of the students to leave the hallway. He walked slowly forward. I knew Carl, sure. Asshole. Made me take 4 burgers in the course of a day once. Good riddance, if you ask me. Riddance? Ian thought aloud. What are you... Drew had moved within arm's length and began to whisper. That guy? You're not going to have to worry about him anymore. Ian was a little concerned about Drew's tone, but before he could interject, Drew moved forward and put his hands on Ian's shoulders, gripping him. Drew locked eyes and steadily began to talk. What you need to worry about right now is the beans and the oil. You need to worry about keeping your mouth shut, and you need to worry about what's wrong with the meat, and you need to... Drew coughed, having only a second to turn his head towards the white wall next to him. Blood splattered the corner of the bulletin board, and Drew chuckled, almost madly. He gathered himself, took his hands off Ian, and pointed as he turned to walk away. You need to worry about that. Ian looked at the blood. It was shimmering, metallic. Ian turned back to call out to Drew, but Drew was already looking at him. You okay, kid? He was staring, almost concernedly at Ian, as if he was seeing this scene for the first time. Ian couldn't handle anymore. He pulled himself in the opposite direction, down the hallway. He made his way back to his car in the parking lot, muttering to himself, There's something wrong with the meat, 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 there's something wrong with the... Mr. James! The suit staring at him was casually leaning on Ian's Subaru. He must have been waiting for Ian to notice him. I'm going to need you to come with me for a moment. The man took Ian to a small bench not too far away from his car. Ian failed for the 5th time to quiet his mind, so he turned and asked, What do you want to know? The man was quiet, but almost disregarded Ian's query. What is this? He gestured to the notebook Ian had in his hands. Ian was quick to reply. It's my sketchbook. I draw in it when I'm nervous or when I'm bored. Usually both at the same time. The man looked at Ian square in the eyes for a moment, then extended his hand. Ian didn't want to hand the notebook over, so he turned it and opened it for him, showing the first few pages. As the man studied, Ian was trying to figure out how to explain the one he had just shown his professor. The man stopped him and said, "I know about the last one. You don't have to hide it." Ian froze. He turned to the last page, the Sprickets diagram. "Yeah, that's the one. What is it?" Ian didn't know what to say, so he went with the convenient story he came up with earlier. He spouted, "I'm running a D&D game with some friends, and I wanted to make an enemy for them to fight in a cave, so I came up with this. I wanted them to find the drawing first, so I made this." The man paused, seeming to percolate on this information for a moment. He began to chuckle. "All right, Ian." He stood. "Head on back to work." Ian was surprised, but when he got back up to ask the man for more, he dropped his things. When he finally stood, collected, the man was already walking away. A single white sedan was parked up the curb about 10 yards away, and the man was already there. Ian was paranoid, so he grabbed his stuff and went to the car. Ian pulled into his spot and took a moment to breathe. As he got out of the car, he exhaled, realizing that it was Tuesday. It was going to be a slow night. This calmed him down a bit, and he headed inside. Ian clocked himself in and waited a moment. Cody hadn't shown up for work yet. It was already 4 p.m. The day shift guys were leaving. Odd, he thought. As he waved to the last guy, Frank walked out of the office. He flicked a switch, turning the sign out front to closed. Confused, Ian turned to Frank and saw the police officers pull in out front. Oh, hell. Ian realized that they had never talked to him. He was probably going to have to answer some questions. "Don't worry, Ian," Frank calmly stated. "This isn't going to affect your job. They just want to ask a few things." Ian let his head fall a bit, but slowly went to take a seat at one of the tables in the dining area. Frank brought over a soda cup, but Ian would probably just end up filling it with water anyway. As he was going to fill it, the officers came in. Ian took another deep breath and turned to face his situation, taking note of what Drew had told him. "You need to worry about keeping your mouth shut." One of the officers was scratching his head. "So, Mr. Ruckman was alive, moving around, with his gut sliced open." Ian responded, calculating. "Yes, officer, he had a scar, horizontal, on his belly. It looked like it had been sewn but reopened." The officers were obviously annoyed. They were struggling to figure out something, but Ian couldn't quite tell what. He added, "And that's when I ran out. I called 911, and I had the conversation you've probably heard already." The officer to his left threw his hands up. "All right, kid, it's just, we thought you were pranking us. You gotta admit, it's not a call we get every day. So, let's just show him the victim, Ellis, and get moving." Ellis, the other officer, pulled out a Polaroid and held it to Ian's eye level. "Do you recognize the man in this image?" Ian almost did not, if it wasn't for the fact that they were wearing the same pants. The man in the image was about 1/10 of Carl's weight. The body was covered in stretch marks, but unnaturally skinny. Ian was fighting his gag reflex again, and also wrestling with his own mind's narrative of the events. Whatever that thing was, it ate him. Or most of him. He couldn't tell, and didn't want to give away what he'd learned. He stammered, Yeah, that's the guy." Ellis took the photo away and gave a solemn nod, almost apologizing for exposing Ian to it. Ian quickly inquired, What about his cat? He called for it at one point. Is it okay?" He was hoping this would get some reaction. The officers indeed winced at this question. "You probably don't need to know, my friend." Ellis was almost pleading in tone. "But they found that cat in another room. It had been dead for at least 3 days. Starved to death. If only the bastard spent the money he was spending on all that food." He trailed off. It looked like it was striking a nerve with Ellis. Ian took note. This was a good cop. Ian relaxed and said, I'm sorry, officers, that's all I know." Hands were shaken, numbers exchanged, and Ian waved them off as Frank brought the shades down. "I guess we are closed for the night," Ian thought. Frank beckoned him into the office. Ian walked slowly, his mind and body starting to grow weary. As he turned the corner to Frank's office, Jim was standing with Frank, holding a gun. That's new, Ian thought, before the rational part of his brain took over and realized the gun was trained on him. What the hell? Ian managed to get out before the revolver clicked and beckoned him to the seat. His sketchbook lay open on the desk, exposed to the page he was so desperately trying to hide. Ian couldn't handle this. It was about all he could take to sit down and wait, as Frank brought up a small Tupperware container from his desk. Inside was a small skittering creature, and a very familiar napkin. As Ian stared ever closer, he confirmed his suspicion. It was the same thing he saw that night. A Spricket, he stated, terrified. Jim and Frank sputtered and began to chuckle. You've got to be kidding me. All this time and we haven't come up with a good name and it falls right on our plate. Frank wiped a tear from his eye. That's why I like you, Ian. You're witty. Jim pressed the gun to the back of Ian's head, reminding him of the fact that he's in a life and death situation. We know you saw it, Ian, and now you've seen two. The question we have for you now is, do you want to know, or do you want to die? Ian gulped. He hadn't had time to formulate a plan, an investigation. He didn't know what the hell he was going to do. Fight? No, it was too late. This had gotten out of hand, before he could even react. His mind was racing, tumbling, and there was only one feasible answer. I want to know. A sharp pain hit his neck, and as he turned to see what Jim had done, he saw the syringe in Jim's free hand. As the color faded from the world, he took solace in the fact that whatever came next, he would know the truth. The light was blinding. As Ian awoke, he was faced towards a white wall. A large frame covered each side. LED strips adorned the walls and ceiling, and a humming noise was coming from somewhere, like an HVAC unit was on the other side of one of the walls. Jim was there, clad now in a white jumpsuit and screened helmet. On the opposite side, the man who had approached him in the college's parking lot. Dr. Beckett? Jim nodded towards Ian. He's awake. Beckett, an aged man, but still seeming youthful with his salt and pepper hair, stepped forward, clad in the same suit that Jim was wearing. My boy, he insinuated. I suppose we'll have to thank you for the name. Spricket. Am I saying that right? Ian nodded lazily. Whatever drug was in his system was still making everything a bit fuzzy. Beckett continued. Good. That's going to make a lot of things I'm about to explain easier. He tapped a tablet attached to a desk, and a projection flickered to life on the white-framed wall. It was old, 1940s era. What we're about to show you is No, honesty is our policy. The highest secret in America, and to a certain degree the entire world. You will not breathe a word of this to anyone. Ever. That's not a command, that's a statement of fact, you understand? Ian nodded again, his adrenaline beginning to nurse whatever cocktail Jim had pricked him with. He sat up a bit, realizing he was completely unrestrained. Yes, we're not going to hold you hostage, trust me, we're not barbarians. He clicked a small remote and the image began to play. It was an old film reel, showing a young man holding up bits of metal. Beckett began to monologue, and the presentation continued to follow along. Roswell, New Mexico. A young man finds debris from a weather balloon believed to be a top-secret project by the US government. Everyone knows this, at least in passing. The truth is exactly that. It was a weather balloon. It fell to Earth after being struck by a meteorite about 2 inches in diameter, which was already recovered about 4 miles away. The truth is exactly that. It was a weather balloon. It fell to Earth after being struck by a meteorite about 2 inches in diameter, which was already recovered about 4 miles away. The presentation showed a small, almost perfectly spherical rock with small indents along the sides, appearing to be made of a shiny metal. Beckett continued. This meteorite was anything but. It was, believe it or not, first contact. And a gift, as it were, upon further research. He clicked again, and the presentation changed to a cross-section of the sphere. It was noted that the core was an embryo, containing some form of life. It was immersed in warm water and experimentation began. All research proved inconclusive until one day, almost 20 years later. While examining the shell, a small indented section came loose, with some type of machinery. A young scientist, he stopped and gestured toward himself, then continued, pressed a switch, and a broadcast was psychically beamed to each person's mind within a 10-yard radius. A small box was on the table. Beckett opened it and pulled out the small orb. He reached inside, winked at Ian, and said, "It is weird, I warn you," and pressed some mechanism with an audible click. "This is a gift, a blessing from the kiln. Use it in the coming famine. Those who do shall be spared." Ian's mind was ringing, if you could call it that. He didn't think there would be a concept for thought volume, but it was like he had that dialogue in his own inner narration simply turned to 11. Beckett looked eagerly to see if Ian was still with him. "Good, it appears the onboarding process is working well." Continuing, he brought the presentation back to focus. "The Queen, as the scientist had been told exclusively, as he was the first to activate the message, is in its larval state and requires a particular substance to feed and breed. By no coincidence, later on in 1974, liposuction was invented. Fatty tissue, specifically that of a being with higher consciousness. We tested first with monkeys and that worked for a bit, but something about the way the human body processed food made it more nutritious and appetizing for the Queen. We had people eating round the clock. It was a bit grotesque, really." Ian couldn't help but raise an eyebrow at that last statement. "Oh, I'm aware it's not as difficult to swallow as the rest of it, but we felt a strange compulsion. We wanted to see her grow. We wanted to see the gift for ourselves, and sure enough." He advanced his presentation to the creature Ian had so aptly named. A spricket was hatched from a small pod ejected from the Queen's abdomen. A drone. It was docile, awaiting instruction, or perhaps waiting for more of its kind. We soon found out its true purpose as it began to feed on the fat as well, and began to weave. That's the best way we can describe it. Ian saw. It was mesmerizing and terrifying. The creature's abdomen was swaying back and forth rapidly, its hind legs moving faster than the camera could see. It wove for a few minutes and then moved, showing the product of its work. A monkey's paw. Ian lost the battle with his gag reflex, finally. As he spattered out bile, Beckett continued. Yes, it's quite macabre. These drones, they have the ability to weave any organic matter they've fed on. Upon dissection, we discovered that the abdomen contains a material almost akin to stem cells, which can form just about any protein-based matter you can think of. Ian was beginning to put it together, but there were a few things that Drew had said that popped into his mind. The bean, the oil, Carl. He spat again to clear his mouth and sputtered, "But what's this got to do with Unreal? Why was that man split open?" Beckett grimaced and stated, "Around this time, the US government realized that we were simply running out of food. Do you ever wonder why beef costs $30 a pound nowadays?" Beckett clicked his tongue, hesitated, and moved on with his speech. "The drones don't start out as big as the one you saw the other night. They have to grow. We were having difficulty figuring out how to distribute them with the amount of lipo fat, until someone in the research department found out that the egg pods were resilient to most acids. One of the research team put 2 and 2 together and realized..." Ian expelled as he realized it himself. Oh my God, you eat them!" He was breathing heavily, eyes wide. "The patties, the bean bits, they're eggs. The rest is the meat that the drones create." He nearly vomited again as he said, "Then they feed on you from the inside out. That's why the wound looks surgical. They can weave whatever material they need." Beckett clapped. "My God, Jim, he's really good. Where did you find him?" Jim groaned. "It's not me you need to thank. You need to thank my, He paused, considering whether to let it out. Beckett realized what Jim was getting at and chimed, "Oh, right, we haven't gotten to that bit either. As you can probably guess, Ian, these creatures, these sprickets, as you call them, when they gather in number, they can recreate just about anything organic. Plants, animals, And even, he hit another button on the projector's control, and it switched to security footage of the exterior of whatever building they were in. It was still midday, and a sign in the front, immediately visible, gave the location away. Schultz Farms. Before Ian could gather any more information from it, the feed switched to the interior, a stark contrast from the friendly farmland assumedly above. Inside, there were people, swarming around, working steadily. Each one seemed different at first, but as Ian looked on, he saw that many of them shared the same faces, similar body types. It was like they were shuffled around on a character creation screen in a video game. Clones, Ian stated, and Jim winced, retorting, "Don't say that to him, it's insensitive. But for the most part, yeah." Beckett held up a hand and Jim raised his, sheepishly, almost as if to deflect the conversation back to the doctor. "Now, Ian," he said calmly, "I need to ask you a question, and I need you to respond honestly. Have you eaten an Unreal burger?" Ian was thanking his lucky stars as he spat. No, I ate around one of the fucking eggs." "That must have been the one that Frank had in the container," Jim estimated. Beckett smiled and beamed. "What a smart kid. Now answer me another one, but this time differently." A microwave dinged behind Ian, and he saw a Frank there. He must have been standing silently there the entire time. Frank was giving a grim smile and put a tray in front of Ian. A lone Unreal special and a bottle of water. Beckett had walked forward and put his hands on the tray in front of him. "Do you understand your situation? You know everything. Do you wish to end our business and go back to your usual life with the understanding that nothing you've seen here will be known by anyone? Then, you eat the burger." Then Beckett leaned in. "Or, would you like to make yourself useful for the Queen?" Ian thought for a moment that this was too much. He wasn't being given a lot of time. He had to think quickly. He could dart out of here as fast as he... Oh God, Ian thought. He could feel it. That rumbling in his stomach. It wasn't normal. Beckett laughed and stated, "You think you'd be in front of us if you weren't incubating? There are 2 eggs in every patty, my boy. That means you'll live twice as long as Jim here." Jim's face was dark, and the doctor continued, "By the way, the shimmering oil you keep seeing, that's the amniotic fluid of the Queen. So long as you keep eating it once every few days, the spricket inside you will remain dormant. Go back to eating real food and, well, you'll end up like Carl." Ian couldn't think of any other means to escape. He slumped in his chair. He stagnated a moment, then took the burger in his hands. As he brought it up to his mouth, he froze. As a terrible idea formed in his mind, he ended up thinking it aloud. "It doesn't matter what I do." He threw the patty down. You have me already. Don't give me a choice because I know I don't have one. Show me all of it." Beckett flashed a wicked grin. "Wow, that's a new one, all right." He motioned toward the back of the room, and Ian got up to follow him. He hobbled over to a set of double doors at the back, where the humming was coming from. Beckett pressed a button and simply remarked, "You asked for it." Ian fainted before he even truly saw what was out there. Most people were in awe of the Queen, and few that hadn't been onboarded could tolerate her presence. The Queen, obfuscated by a large cylinder of glass and immersed in water, bubbled into Beckett's mind.
"He did not eat. Production."
Beckett thought for a moment, twirling the sphere from earlier in his hand, gazing out at the many metal racks of worker drones, creating new gyms, small pucks of meat, thousands on top of each other stacked in these platforms like bees before having their honey harvested. "Yes, my dear," he responded kindly, almost as if to an old friend. "Fresh meat. Start with 1, and we'll monitor how he develops." Molly was beginning her shift as Ian walked in. The guy looked tired, like he hadn't slept a wink. He coughed a few times and headed back to the delivery line. "Don't get me sick, Space Cadet. I've got finals this week." He looked back at her. She had expected the typical knowing smirk from her favorite coworker, but he looked back with eyes she didn't know. He slowly stated, "It's just food poisoning. Don't worry about it." He turned and grumbled some more. As Molly's concern grew, Frank popped out of the office, seeming to assess Ian and looking at her assuredly. "Hey, Moll, why don't you put down Ian for an Unreal special?" Ian looked up at Frank, and Molly noticed something in his expression, almost defiant, before he responded, "Yeah, Moll, go ahead and ring me in." As he turned the corner to the break room, he quipped, "We're all starving over here."